Hey everyone, welcome to the session. How's it going? Come here, sorry, just to give you the heads up in advance, I have a little cough in my little chest. So bear with me, I have a glass of water anyway. But look, come here, I hope you're all great and enjoying your January. We've had such a busy schedule with events this month, which is great, and it's brilliant to see you all getting really involved and engaged. So fair play to you. So come here, before we get going, as always, a tiny little bit of housekeeping. Today is Careers Masterclass cover letter writing. So we're going to get a bit creative today with your storytelling skills. And look, we have the hour as always. We have plenty of time for Q&A. We have a number of slides to go through. And basically, we're just going to try and bring you from start to finish with what is a sort of an unusual document in some ways. Very important and a really good opportunity for you to, I suppose, put your stamp and your tone and your personality in a job application. One other thing I will say about cover letter writing, even if you're not going to be asked for it in an interview process, which you very often will be, but this is a brilliant session for getting used to just articulating yourself and your story, which I promise and guarantee you is going to be the first sort of 5 minutes of any interview you ever do. So time well spent. Okay, so come here. Megan is with us today as well. Megan, thank you for your support as always. And Megan will probably be asking a couple of questions throughout this, just in terms of polls, and we'll also be able to share before we close up links to our next masterclass. Okay, so that's it. So let's get started. Sorry. The season of colds, guys, eh? So listen, this is what we're going to go through, just so that you all know what to anticipate. So I suppose in terms of the basics, for want of another words, but the important to remember elements of a cover letter. And then in the same way that we talked a lot about CVs and like what happens to them when they send them, when you use them and when you submit them somewhere. Also making sure that you understand what the purpose of a cover letter is. And then we're just going to go through the sort of, real practicalities, talking about tone and personality, how to get started, and, just give you some templates. And then also some nice sort of positive ways of phrasing things, which might help if any of you are a bit stuck in how to do things. And then Q&A. So starting at the start, which is always a good place to be, there's a couple of three things that you should remember when we write our cover letters, which is really different technique actually to writing a CV. And firstly, a cover letter is a really, really, really frequent part of a job application. And in some ways, it's surprising because a lot of us think that tech is going to be all about your tech test and your tech skills and your ability to code. And obviously, that is an important part of your career journey, and it is going to be an important part of an interview. But it's not necessarily the most important part. And I hope that you find that reassuring because when companies are hiring, they're hiring people, and there are lots of quite kind of complicated automated tools that CVs have to navigate through, but a cover letter doesn't have to do that. So firstly, the recipient of a cover letter is always really keen to read it and curious about the person who's applying to work with them. But often a cover letter just doesn't have to behave in the same way as a CV does. So the first point here, that a cover letter will be read by a human, it looks like a bizarre sentence, but it's really true, and it's really important to bear that in mind. It typically won't be kind of battered around in a parsing tool. It will accompany your application and will immediately be read by a human being. So what opportunity does that present? It presents us to be able to tell our story in a way that usually we wouldn't get to do until an interview. And it can tell a better story in the terms of kind of being creative. And a CV we can add personality to a CV, but it's still a very sort of factual document. There are timelines, there are very precise sort of things that happen, but in a cover letter we kind of get to flesh out the narrative a little bit. And I'm really happy to give some of my own examples through this, just to sort of really explain to you why that's important. And then the third point there, this is a chance to add tone. It's an opportunity to put the kind of character on a page and bringing it back into the first line. When a human being is reading this, it involves emotion, and emotion is not something that parsing tools or applicant tracking systems possess. So decisions can often, really become emotive based, and people's response to a letter is something that you can't just separate from what you put on the page. So maybe already you're kind of realizing that this is a very different document to a CV. And when you're at the master classes with us about about CV writing, it's a very different technique. It's a very different discipline. So just try and sort of wash your brain of what you might do in a CV, and remember that this is going to look and feel very differently. Okay, so firstly, what's the point, right? So and people do say to me, like, why would anybody ask me for a cover letter? I've already written a CV. I've already put a little executive summary in it. But just to re-emphasize, again, when a person is hiring somebody into their company, there's processes that they follow, and they're not hiring their best friends, but they are hiring a person, and they want to understand how this person kind of behaves and what's important to them, and maybe just what's brought them there. And I think as well, this becomes particularly relevant when we have situations like what we would have very commonly in Code Institute when people are changing careers. So the decision making process behind that is a really important factor as to what kind of person you're dealing with. So that's what it adds. It adds an extra layer to a CV and gives some insight to the profile that you're hiring. So again, always put yourself in the boots of the person who's going to read this document, and it helps them kind of understand what the story so far has been. It's a really good interview aid, and sort of brings me back to what I said at the beginning. The first couple of questions that you're asked in any interview is always just to set the tone and to enable the person that you're talking to understand where your kind of starting point is and your attributes. So how you present your story, you have a lot of control over that. So let's look through the five. The five. This is getting a little bit psychoanalytic, but it's very important to do that. So the five main boxes here is that we get an immediate sense of somebody's personality. We also get an immediate understanding of circumstance. So I'm always doing consultations with you guys, and uh, every single meeting I go into, there's a slightly different situation in hand, and you're all so unique. And it's the same when we're interviewing. When you go into an interview, everyone they meet is going to have a different set of circumstances. Time and time again, I leave those meetings with just a really strong sense of admiration. Like the personal things that can be thrown at people through a journey, and their response to it is really what makes you you know understand how they behave. And it's pretty incredible. So this also leads us into understanding more about somebody's ability, and what that could mean for your team if you were going to hire them, what their future potential is. So look, the best indicator of how somebody will behave is how they've behaved in the past. So being able to understand some of the decisions that have been made that a CV just it hasn't got the capability to go into in too much depth. A cover letter will be able to cover that off. And so, look, again, it invokes an emotive response. And this is something that is really important when you're dealing with humans, and and you're a human and I'm a human, and most of the people who are hiring you presumably are going to be human too. So this is something that they're going to respond to, and it is something that can really impact a decision. So just be aware of that. It's a much more personalized element of the journey. And then obviously, look, just to repeat here again, it's not going to have to endure the sometimes very complicated journey that a CV does. It's going to go straight to a human eye. And please, if you take anything from this session today, just remember that if a cover letter is asked for, it's probably the first document that a human is going to look at in your recruitment process, and it's also something that they'll consider a really valuable part of their decision, particularly when it comes to shortlisting. So, okay, so if there's any questions on that, please, please shoot. But I hope that just kind of helps you understand how, the kind of factors to consider when writing it. So yeah, so look, this when we talk here is really just about the nuts and bolts of what a cover letter should look like. And we do provide a template. So in a slide or two's time, you'll be able to just kind of literally see how the letter should look, or at least an example of, what to kind of work with. But obviously, we just want to kind of balance the tone in this. It's going to be personal. So it can be hard if creative writing isn't isn't your forte, this may take a few drafts, but that's okay. But we want to make sure that there's some personality going into it, but it's a very professional letter. So there's a couple of things that, again, I would steer you through to make sure are present in your letter. So firstly, just on the left hand side there, obviously it should look like a letter. All right, it's not an email. There are, grammatical kind of structures that it defines what a letter is, and it shouldn't look exactly the same as your CV. Like no bullet points, stuff like that. So let's just start at the top. So in terms of kind of the tone, obviously, again, we've said this in the CV. In the CV conversations, like obviously don't ever lie. So I always feel a bit silly saying this, but to be really clear, your letter is a document that needs to be really sincere. I'll go through that in a second, but it's very important that you don't sort of really heavily embellish or maybe kind of mislead somebody a little bit in the letter. So it's a really honest statement of your background. That's what it is. Look, obvious stuff, language and grammar, just make sure your spelling is right, make sure that it's well presented. Run it, there's no excuse for this really, guys, because like I do still get letters with fairly serious grammatical errors in them, and the reader will just think that it's a bit sloppy. There's loads of tools, so just use Grammarly. It's free. um any document that you're writing on should be kind of highlighting your any grammatical errors. And if you're not a native English speaker and you're writing this letter in English, just ask, well, like us obviously in your one-to-one, but run it by someone who you think just would be helpful. So before you send it out, just try and cover that off. Sincerity is a really, really, really nice attribute to have when you're kind of asking or presenting yourself in this manner, and being sincere about your I suppose your observations on your desire to work in technology, your admiration for the recipient's company. So a letter. Obviously, we're not going to write a completely different letter for every single company we send it to. And there's practical elements here when you're job searching in terms of kind of managing your time, but just making sure that if you have an opportunity to personalize it a little bit, that you take that, and that what you're saying isn't completely made up. So if you're sending this to a company that you would really love to work for, don't be afraid to be really sincere about that and make it really clear. And any observations that you may have about their tech stack, something you read about them in the news, like all of these will reinforce that this is, again, a very sincere application. It's not just sort of a spam that you've gone through. And when it comes to letter writing, remember that that's a big deal because it is a human who's going to be reading it. Positivity and humor. Look, who doesn't love a funny, positive person in the workplace, right? But positivity. I don't mean that like forced. You're not an entertainer. You don't have to come in like you're gonna, you know, mind the company in a way that is way beyond your remit. But somebody who comes with solutions, somebody who comes with a really great attitude, there's a really nice way to fill this in. And I've said this before at these sessions, like you guys have put so much time and effort into this program and into your career and into um yourselves, that I think that is a really positive attribute in itself. So being able to do that with a bit of joy and a bit of humor is something that we all like to see around us. So don't be afraid. Like, you don't have to be really, really formal in this letter. It does need to be professional. The tone needs to be balanced, but you can stick in a few exclamation marks. You can acknowledge that what studying and maybe doing this course and juggling that with work or a family or all of your other things wasn't easy, but that gosh, look at what you've gained. And that sort of positive attitude is something that's really nice to get from somebody. um, okay, so there are your 5 kind of pillars. So just to remember, it doesn't have to be overly formal. The grammar needs to be right. It's got to be kind of punchy. It's got to be sincere. And just to reinforce on that positivity bit, you don't have to go overboard with this, but please don't bring any kind of negative references into this letter. And we mentioned this. This is kind of a similar point to when we talked about in CVs. If you had like a tricky subject about maybe your last boss or your last role in the that's listed on your CV. We've tackled this a couple of times, and I know that it's something that a lot of people need to practice, have said to me, God, I need to get used to how to talk about that. In the same way, if your change in career was brought along by something that you still view as being negative, you need to kind of turn that around into it being a challenge, but with a really positive outcome. So I hope that that kind of makes sense, or you understand what I mean by that. So, and on the basis that we do, come here, let's get started. So if any of you, some of you might be writing as we speak, right? So we're going to have a template in the next page, but getting started with this, like in terms of templates, like it's just a letter. So um, it's not like a CV that's going to be formatted in any way. So it's just a letter. Just make it look like a letter. You can do it on any document. I've put two links there: Story2 and Grammarly. So Story2 is this really, really interesting website actually, and you can use it for free. So you'll get you'll be able to use it once for free, and it's a US business, and basically what it's formulated around is aiding graduates, like the process in the US to get into to apply for college or for university is much more complicated than it is in many European areas, and you got to write a really, really good cover letter. So that's what that template is kind of built about. But what they do quite well, if you're really finding it hard to sort of get your story down on paper, they kind of prompt you and ask you questions, and then they formulate it into a letter, and they kind of give it back to you with, if you want to pay them, they'll give you feedback. I wouldn't advise that anyone needs to do that, but what's good is that it just brings you through the process. So for some people who just, this is a really, really alien sort of thing to sit down and do, and it's really driving you bananas, that's a kind of a handy place to just put some time into it and get a letter back that you can work on. And then Grammarly, I've no doubt you're all familiar with Grammarly. It's kind of helpful in that it will give you suggestions on better ways to word sentences, and also obviously look at the basics of your spelling and grammar. So again, look, to emphasize, this is a little bit more creative than a CV. So really, the simplest way to start this is just brain dump and edit it back. So just look, to get going, you're going to have to just literally put pen to paper, and I wouldn't worry too much in your first draft about trying to make it perfect and trying to go through what we're going to have here in terms of the different paragraphs and so on. Just get your story down. So, and when I say your story, your journey, think of that first couple of minutes. How do you define yourself in an interview? That journey that got you into tech, what you like about it, what you can do, and what you want to do going forward. If you get that onto roughly a page, then you've got enough information there to start working with and to edit it backwards. So if you look at the 5 boxes, the good news is that a cover letter will never, ever, 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 ever be longer than a page. And actually, like by the time you've formatted it and paragraphed it out and so on, it's only 3 to 4 paragraphs, one of which is the opening one and one of which is the closing one. So there's not a huge amount of content that we're going to fit in this letter. But if there are any creative writers here who has tried to pen beautiful creative stories before, sometimes editing it is one of the hardest bits. So writing something short sometimes is much more difficult than big, long, rambling passages. So look, there is obviously a technique to it, but there's 3 things that I would just make sure that you do not forget, and frequently people do. Number 1 is your contact details. So there's always the possibility that your cover letter will get separated from your CV in a process, and if that happens, you want to make sure that you can be found. So very simply, always make sure, maybe use a header, because then it's nice and neat, and if the styling is similar to your CV, it looks really beautiful and professional when viewing them both side by side. So you can kind of take the format maybe that you've chosen to present your CV in, but then obviously the body of it is just going to look like a letter. And when I say letter, you're going to see it in the next slide, but I literally mean like Dear Jane, and then the paragraphs and signed off like a lovely, lovely old-fashioned letter. Make sure your GitHub is in here somewhere. So I don't mind if you choose to put it into the body of the letter, or if you choose to put it in the sort of header bit, but have it there. This is being presented to somebody on the basis that you're a developer. So just have it there so they don't get separated. And then, sorry, behind there, that says reference the company. So look, a lot of effort is going to go into this letter, and it may or may not always be reasonable for you to sort of slightly edit who you're sending it to, but the impact that it will have is massive. So remember, it's going to a human, and if you have the opportunity to address that human being correctly, the letter is just going to look really sincere and authentic. If it says, dear sir or dear madam, it immediately becomes generic. So I'm sorry, but that's the reality of cover letter writing. So if you have literally 2 seconds, just make sure that you've referenced who you're writing this to. So you can do that by just writing dear. If it was me, you would write Dear Jane, or you might just write Dear Careers Team and Code Institute. So nobody will expect you to have forensically examined a business to know exactly what everybody's name is, but sometimes it's there and it's advertised, and it'll be noted that you've paid attention to that. And if it's not there, just putting the team just makes them know that this is a very decided application that you're making. And then there's other ways to reference the company, which we'll show you now. So, when we look at letters, so here on the left-hand side, if you're busy kind of scribing your letter, just remember the main things that I know it's a bit repetitive, but it's just to make sure that you remember. The the framework is literally just how it looks, so that it's maybe similar in style to your CV. So that could be something as simple as just making sure you use the same font. If you choose a color, make sure that you use that color consistently. The sizing, the more it kind of mirrors the style that you've chosen for your CV, the more beautiful and professional and synchronized it's going to look. And then obviously just never lose the contact details. They must be there. Now we've lost them on this only because we wanted to fit in the body onto the little slide. But if you could see up the top there, it has our address and our email and so on, and our GitHub. So the letter that you see in front of you, in terms of structure, so what you can observe is that there's kind of 4 main paragraphs, and then there's just the little sign off. Dear team at whatever company it is that you're sending the letter to. And there's a really nice, positive, polite, professional tone. Look, the content, I'm not suggesting at all that your letter has to be worded in exactly this way, but we've just taken the approach of picking a circumstance and picking a situation, which would be sort of common to all of you, in the sense that you've all come through the software development diploma, and that the coding skills that you've been working on are similar to this. So it's a really nice template to use, but the main tenets of it are this, right? So if you start at the top, you're setting the tone. So they're delighted to be in touch with you and the team, etc., etc. You're also stating that you're presenting yourself for consideration for a junior software dev position, and that you're just going to outline some of the really nice key attributes about yourself that that you feel will, I suppose, just help somebody to understand the background a little bit. So in the second paragraph here, again, a really positive statement that the keen interest in technology has always been there. And very often people ignore that because they think that maybe the interest isn't enough, that the only relevant information is something that you've done professionally, and that's not the case at all. Remember what this letter is for and what it does. So it gives some background. So in this case, this person is looking at kind of technology and recruitment, because it's been written from within our own team here in the careers team. So giving some insights as to why that person wanted to move from recruitment into being a developer is a nice kind of narrative, and it just gives key points as to how this decision got made. Then it breaks down into a lovely small paragraph, just so that the person reading it understands what coding languages you're using, and maybe what you've been doing other than that. And there's loads of examples here that you could put in that will just really sort of enhance your approach and your involvement and your ambitions, without any of them being professional engagements, but they're all things that your behaviors will be really similar once you're working. So it's really nice for someone to read. And then obviously then we've put GitHub in bold capitals there, but you would put the link. So that's a really good way to make sure that it's front and center. And then in the closing paragraph, it's a really nice thing to observe and personalize any observations you have about the business. For somebody reading it, it's a really impressive thing to have somebody notice. So and that's it. And then you just tail off. So look, it's not a really complex document by any means, but it does take time to get it right, and it does take time for you to personalize your journey and sort of get it down on paper, so that the storyline of why you came to be here and how that journey happened is something that somebody can understand. So look, so come here. I had promised that I'd kind of just focus on a couple of the things that we see a lot in cover letters, but we would highly suggest that there's better ways of wording it. So we have ditch and suggest a replacement. So first of all, one really important bit is opening who you address this to. So please don't ever use to whom it may concern. It's it's it just immediately, no matter how much work you put into a letter, it just immediately just sounds generic, that you could be spamming this out to anyone who asks you for a cover letter. And it's okay if that's what you are doing, and we understand that people apply for multiple roles, but think of the impact for the person who's getting it. And the more personal you can make it, the better. So if at worst, you could just have like, dear recruitment team, or dear recruitment team at Code Institute, whoever it is you're sending it to. If you can find that person's name, brilliant. Don't waste loads and loads of time doing it. Don't delay an application because you don't know somebody's name, but just, I'm just pointing it out. So instead of to whom it may concern, just write dear. That's the common, like professional sort of way of approaching it, and then the person's name or else the team they're in. So the second one is that very often people make claims about themselves, and sometimes it's a bit jarring to read it because it just sounds a bit generic. And also, it's a big assumption to make that you're the perfect person for them, because there's no way for you to know that yet. Okay. But it's much better to quantify and to try and get them to think you're the perfect person in other ways. So here's why, what we've suggested as a replacement is, here's why I'd love to be part of your team, and then give them quantifiable, really good reasons. So somebody coming with a solution instead of a request is really just a really nice way to get the same result, but it's much smarter. And then the negative language. So remember what we said, like, a negative language doesn't necessarily mean that it's like bad, but a negative language is pointing out something that you don't have as opposed to what you do have. And this is a real technique as well in an interview. So just looking at practicing how you present things and articulate them. So instead of drawing the reader to sentences like, I have no experience in tech yet, firstly, it's not true. Anyone who's coming through here has plenty of experience in building projects. So please just tear that up from your belief system and replace it with what you've been doing. Replace it with an action. So if you think that you're if you're veering near saying stuff like this, I have no experience, I have no professional background, this is brand new to me, just pause, don't send the letter just yet, and look back over it a day later and go, actually, I have been, and this is what I've been doing. And what we've just put in is, like, I've been building these projects over the last year. Like, here's some examples, and stick your link in. Like, this is the project that I loved the most. This is the project I found the most difficult. It's okay. Like, it's a human sort of engagement, but drawing eyes to negative or areas that you don't have is just, it's not the correct approach. So just make sure that you take a good look at that when you're kind of reviewing how it is you've chosen to present yourself in a cover letter. Okay. So sorry, here, I'll go back again. So that's actually the last slide. So what I might do is go back to the letter template, because this is, no, do you know what? I'm going to tell you a really quick story, and it comes, where was it? It was here. And it was really interesting because I'm a career changer, and I went from a sort of a legal consultancy. I used to work as a stenographer in the courts, and this is going back now like a good 10 years ago. But then when I was in the process of moving over to recruitment, it was kind of a bit of a challenge because it seemed like a really big leap. Recruitment is really people focused. It's very kind of nearly salesy in terms of the rhythm and the speed at which things happen. And my CV, I thought, kind of looked a bit bonkers. I had done an English degree. I had done a lot of work in kind of hospitality. I'd been involved in a family business, and then I'd spent a few years as a legal stenographer. And I wish I'd had a session like this to come to, where somebody could have just told me how to tell that story much better. Because really, one of the big reasons why I kept doing these slightly unconnected jobs was that I'd had a baby really early, like straight after college. And that had been the main reason why I had made loads of different decisions and why my job needed to do different things for me. But it was only at the end of my first interview in a company that I really wanted to work with that, one of them just said to me, like, I just don't understand your CV. Like, how did you go from doing this to doing that to doing this? It doesn't make any sense. And it was then I went, oh, right, okay, well, like straight up, this was the reason. And it just cleared the air because before that, the director of the business that was recruiting me was obviously just thinking to himself, this one must just change her mind every 3 years. And if I hire her, is she going to kind of disappear and be gone again? But actually, it was completely the opposite. I was so committed to everything that I was doing, but I just had this kind of pressure point that meant that I needed my role to change for me. So my behavior was exactly what he needed. Somebody who responds to it, somebody who works with people, somebody who has a really sincere reason for wanting this career. But I just hadn't had the opportunity to have a bit of free time before to go and pursue it. So it can be something really like that. That a CV will never be able to portray what you can in a cover letter. And that underlying reason of what drives you, the underlying reason of why certain decisions got made at different times, it just fills the gap really, really well. And that's what I mean by reacting to circumstances, taking a positive approach, having a bit of humor about it, being sincere in what your decision making process is, and just how available you are to commit to something is a really important attribute. And it's a really important thing when it comes to a career changer, to try and sort of just join the dots to the human being that's sitting across the table. So don't be cagey about things, and put a bit of time and practice into this, because it's those kind of letters that will do really, really well. And also, like I've said loads of times, it's really, really, really helpful for someone to just be able to understand your story and to be able to understand it quite quickly. If you can do that in the first couple of minutes of an interview, the rest of the time is going to be spent talking about technology. It's going to be spent talking about coding. It's going to be give you time and opportunity to ask them lots of questions. But if you're like telling this really long, complicated story that everyone has to keep stopping and sort of rechecking, it's going to give you less control over how successful the interview might be. Um, so that's I suppose, just there may be loads of questions about how to kind of formulate the letter, and if there are, shoot, go for it, that you can pop them into the chat function. But that's kind of what I would draw your eye back to. That's what makes this really, really different to a CV, and this is somehow the deciding factor very often. All right, so I might just let it rest for a minute on the firstly, maybe on this, if any of you wanted to try story2.com, because I know I quite enjoy writing. Like, writing a cover letter is fun for me, but I'm fully aware that a lot of people come to the consultations and say, oh my God, I hated writing the cover letter. This is like, much as I mightn't have loved doing my CV, the cover letter is a very unusual way for me to spend my time talking about myself. So in that case, story 2, you need to be prepared to put a bit of time in, and it is quite kind of with total respect to creative processes, it's a very American site, so it asks a lot of questions about your like childhood memories and like favorite moments in life so far and stuff like this. So you may feel like you're kind of veering pretty far off your technical journey, but stick with it. It's kind of cool. The way it comes back to you in the end is kind of good fun. And then, look, you all know Grammarly. So there you go. So there's the letter. Let's let it sit there for a minute. And I'm gonna have a look. I know that Megan has been running some polls. So 60% of you are more comfortable. 66% of you are more comfortable updating a cover letter now, but there's still 33% of you that are still unsure. Okay, so look, while we're here, we still have some time. So if there's quite a few of you that are still just not sure about this, like, stick in the chat which bits that you're not. Oh, okay, it's changing. It's going up to 75%. Stick in the chat if you're really unsure about how you might do this, because on a really practical basis, it's literally you kind of have to start telling your story. And if you have some questions about how to do that, that's appropriate for here. Maybe I can help. But really, if we look at this, maybe I'll kind of run through some examples while we're on this page. And everybody's story is a little bit different, but it literally could be, I've always been into technology. This is something that I just never had the opportunity to study before. And here are things that I've done before, and here's what I'm good at. Okay, wait, hang on. There's some questions now. Okay, cool. Okay, so Cormac, thank you. And also, Cormac, I think you're the Cormac that I was emailing earlier on. So thanks for being so nice if you are. So, firstly, this question is for cover letter CVs. Oh, and LinkedIn, but how do you decide what to include or not? I'm moving to tech from an industry that I was in for a few years, and before that, I had multiple generic retail jobs. Should I include them for a tech role? So there's a certain amount of filtering that we would do. So no, you probably wouldn't put everything in. In terms of CV and LinkedIn, usually the only place where someone is going to pay a lot of attention is probably the most recent ones. So the most recent kind of two or three. I suppose there's a little bit of tailoring there depending on how long did you spend in those jobs, and that's something that we'll go over in our one-to-one because obviously everyone's CV is a bit different. But in a cover letter, I wouldn't be listing a load of different roles that you've done. Like, to give my example, I would be putting in there if I was changing jobs from, like, kind of recruitment, which is what I do now, into being a coder. That second paragraph would be all that I'd include about my previous career, because you want to talk to them about your future career and the decision that you've already made to commit to that. So, I mean, my background would be, look, I've done a lot of consultancy work. I'm working in recruitment. I work with career changers, and I have a massive interest in technology. And now is my first step into this being my professional focus. That would just be as much as you really want to dwell on in your previous roles. There's really nice skill sets that people bring, so it's not like your previous roles become unimportant by any stretch of the imagination. But in terms of the narrative of telling a story, you just want somebody to understand what your intentions and your motivations are and kind of set the scene a little bit. So, particularly for someone who's changing career, you want to kind of give them some key examples of how this isn't just on a whim application, that this is something that you've made a very decisive commitment to. You've invested a lot of time already. Those behaviors are something that someone employing you can trust, and that they know that if they take the risk of hiring you, or take the chance that this is going to be a really good match, that the chances are that you're going to stick with it, because you're really highly motivated about it. So I hope that helps. And then Ian. Hi, Ian. Thanks for this. So Ian has about 20 years experience in IT, but his CV is 3 pages long. Okay, so you find it hard to condense all of this in a cover letter. Yeah, I know what you mean. And and then you haven't been working in tech for a few years. How do you address it? So, firstly, your CV will be. We really need to edit it down to about 2 pages, Ian. So, let's loop back in kind of separately on that. It is obviously hard to condense it into a cover letter, but a cover letter is never going to be like a CV. Like, it's never going to detail everything. It's about you as a person. And obviously, trying for any of us to condense our whole life into a page is obviously pretty tricky, but just bear in mind the reason that you're writing it. So just getting it down to one, like, when I say one paragraph, I mean, you've managed to fit it in there and we all understand, but you've done it in 4 lines. And so you are able to do it. It's just that you're so familiar with all the detail that it's really hard to get it into a letter form. And I suppose we all have a bit of an impression now of the background and the context. So look, it's probably going to take a couple of edits, and it's going to take a couple of run throughs, but it's going to be time really, really well spent. And then obviously for everyone here, like, you have the facility in your one-to-ones to come and get these reviewed, but you need to start getting them down on paper, so that we can we can go through it really well on a one-to-one. So, okay. So, and David, hi, David. So David, David says 43 feels that he needs to mention older than the average changer. Well, I don't know if you are. How can I convey enthusiasm and make them aware that I'm at a stage in my life where I'm kind of seldom more to kids? So I guess I suppose I'm trying to kind of wholly understand why you wouldn't be enthusiastic when you have lovely things like kids and mortgages. Lots of people are aspiring to have them. So I guess, look, I'm sorry, I'm being facetious and just joking with you, but I presume what you mean is that there's, you have commitments, and there's kind of, you're really enthusiastic about doing this, but that you're very conscious of the risks, and you're not going to be starting again as a junior that you're trying to transition across. And the skill sets that you have, David, are definitely going to be of high interest. And really honestly, in terms of age and stage that people do this at, it's really far ranging. So I really wouldn't kind of allow that stick in your head as being a kind of a negative thing. And there's lots of roles that you can do that might incorporate all of your new software development skills, but also require some of the skills that you already have. So that would be, excuse me, sorry, that would be something I think we should tackle in our one-to-one. But again, in your letter, you can kind of, so I'm laughing at Ian's point. Again, in your letter, like this, remember what I said about sincerity and honesty. Like, I was really nervous about telling some of my bosses that there was a baby in the background, and that commitment, that is exactly the same situation. Like, I had too many commitments to take a big risk on my career. Like, this had to work out. There was just no area for deviation or wrong choices. So but that was a really attractive quality for my new employer, because they knew that the commitment was there, and they knew that the motivation was there, and they could understand that the thought that I put into this really, really mattered. And if I had the opportunity, I was going to really make it work. So use all of these as a positive piece, and I promise you, it'll be responded to. So it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of conviction to put extra time into doing something new with your career. And somebody interviewing you is going to admire that. So it's okay to say in a letter, look, I thought long and hard about this career change, and I feel really ready for it, having committed the last 12 months to juggling a full-time role, or starting afresh, relearning something. And the joy and the satisfaction I've got from it are massive. Like, I can't wait to apply it to my new career. Stuff like that. Don't present it as a negative, and it won't be interpreted as one. And by the way, like, retraining and rethinking your career is always going to be seen as a positive. That's not something that I would worry about. Um, okay, thanks, David. And Anna, so how would you explain in your cover letter a gap on your CV to focus on your current career change? Very easily. So I'm guessing what you mean is that you haven't been working because you've been like deciding what to do in terms of your next career choice, and then presumably doing the diploma as well, which is really time consuming. So just really simply, you don't have to explain yourself in it, sorry, you need to give a narrative and a timeline to people, but you don't have to like apologetically explain anything to anybody ever. But it's just to help them understand what's been happening. So I literally would just say, look, I've really prioritized my career change over the last 12 months. And my time has been spent working through this diploma, producing these projects. Here's what I've done. It's not really anyone's business in many ways, whether you were earning or weren't earning. You could have been working if you'd wanted to, Anna, but this was the way and the method that suited you and worked for what it was that you needed to do. So again, just present it as a decision that you're really comfortable with. And it's really common and really normal for people to have gaps in their CV of times when they weren't working. And it can be down to all sorts of things. Sometimes people just go traveling, sometimes family commitments, sometimes like I don't know, children, sometimes a partner may have taken a job overseas, and it was just there was too many things on the go. Like, there's just so many reasons, and studying is a really, really good one. Investing in a career change is a really good one. The only time people get hung up at it when they're reading it is if it's kind of undocumented and it seems to be a bit of a secret as to what somebody was doing for a while. Then naturally people get curious and want to know more, just in case there's something hidden there. So I would just be upfront with it. On a CV, we handle that where we can just put in a timeline or a date and say, parental leave, traveling, studying, whatever, and people just accept it. No one gets too concerned. So I really seriously wouldn't worry about that at all. It's really common to see. So sorry, there's two questions that Anna, sorry, I didn't mean to jump off bluntly like that. I hope that sort of helps you. And also, if you wanted to know more about that, of how to present it on a CV, we deal with it quite comprehensively in the CV writing seminars. So there's two questions there. So sorry, Michael and Alexandra. So Alexandra has a question about the career advisor. Is it necessary to prepare your CV and cover letter for this meeting? It is, Alexandra, and the reason, so I presume you guys can all see these questions. So just in preparation for your one-to-one, what we ask people to bring is their CV, their cover letter, and just a link to their LinkedIn profile, so that we can go through all of them and give you like really personalized tips or feedback. And then also in a one-to-one, these questions sometimes are much easier to tackle because everyone's situation is a little different, but we can kind of give you some tips on how to maybe present that, both in how you articulate it verbally and also how you might present it in a document. So yeah, like, coming to the seminars or the one-to-ones without those documents is a bit of a missed opportunity. So yeah, if you could bring them, that'd be great. And then Michael, hi Michael. So Michael's a photographer doing a course in UX design as well, and obviously here. So how does he, and of course in environmental management, he's finished a degree. Oh my God, you're really busy, Michael. You've loads on. So he says, I know it sounds mad, but I have a long-term goal. How do I explain my scattered work, academic goals and achievements? So like, well, firstly, UX and software design, what I would have said were really complementary. So they're all totally on track. And then in environmental management, so maybe your sort of master plan is to somehow combine all of these in a certain year of thoughts. Maybe your master plan is to combine all of these in a certain way. So if I knew more about what that was, maybe that would kind of help. But they're not as scattergun as you think. Like, lots of people here, if they have a degree, it can be in all sorts of things. So it's really wide ranging what people might be doing a degree in. And like, I don't know, like, I don't think it sounds as scattergun as you do. You just sound really busy. So there's a lot, but it seems like you know where it's going, which is um in some ways nearly the harder bit. Having a plan is really good. So maybe again in our one-to-ones we can kind of get more information and sort of help you flesh that out a bit. And then also, like, okay, Mike, I'm going to use you as an example, right? Also, when it comes to deciding what your kind of your messages, and getting some help with that in the one-to-ones, it can really influence what companies you might be approaching. And if there is an environmental waste management company or an environmental tech business, which there are loads of, that story is music to their ears. So I know that isn't really the content of today's session, but um, planning who it is that you want to work for is a really big part of getting this right. And like, maybe if I leave it back into my example that I gave earlier on, like, I really, really, really wanted to work in recruitment, and I did some research before I sent out, before I sent out any CVs, and because I knew just like that I was going to have maybe I anticipated I was going to have a bit of a struggle because I thought my CV was kind of weird and really mixed. But I really wanted to go somewhere that was like a kind of a boutique agency where I'd get really good training. I wanted to go somewhere that did both commercial and tech recruitment, and I wanted to go somewhere that had, a really strong management team, so that there would be kind of a ladder for me, but that also there was going to be people there who knew a lot more than me. So that was kind of my criteria, and I knew that everything else would come together once I got talking to people like that. And it was quite easy to research. So, but I would say this to people in one-to-ones all the time. Look at your backgrounds, and look at what your big strengths are, and look at companies that are hiring people like you. So for everyone who put some questions in the chat earlier about, how do I balance a gap? How do I balance, you know, it, how do I balance having worked, like, was it David or Ian, like 20 experience in IT, like hallelujah to lots of companies. And I'm sure there's lots of people in this seminar thinking, I wish I had 20 years in IT. Like, that would be really nice to be able to go into an interview with and be able to reference. So you've all got unique stories, and everyone's got kind of strengths and areas in their CV that they're a bit worried about. So just it takes a little bit of thought, but it's that thinking time that is going to really help you out, so that you're not doing the thinking when you're in an interview. If you go in with like a lot of confusion about what you're good at and what you want, then sometimes that becomes very apparent in an interview, and particularly if you're dwelling on stuff that you're presuming is going to be a problem for someone. Most of the time it isn't, to be honest with you. What's really nice is when you're interviewing someone or looking at someone's documents and they're clear about what they're good at, they're clear about what they want. That doesn't have to be arrogant, but they're really comfortable with their own story, and practicing that a little bit is really good. So yeah, so actually it's interesting, like a lot of the things that people have listed here as being concerns of theirs of how they'll present it, none of them are things that I would worry about at all. And if I was screening CVs, these aren't things that I would be, kind of unnerved to see. Um, so career conscious, it's 10 to. Okay, so I just looked back at Megan's poll. So we're up at 80% being more comfortable. So I'm glad I looked at that earlier on there. There's still 20% of you that aren't. So I want to try and help fix that. So look, if there's anyone that's come to the seminar, has written a cover letter, is leaving here unsure about whether it's any good, just just email it to me. Let's try and help that, and I would like you to think that your time here has been really well spent. So if you want to email it to me, you know where I am. It's jane@codeinstitute.net, and I'll take a look at it and get it back to you within the week. Okay. Or if you have any small questions that I just you think are quite maybe personal to your story, bring that to your one-to-one with us. Oh, sorry, that's just bring it to your one-to-one with us, and we'll absolutely be able to tackle it. So don't worry, this is what this is for. And I would much rather you be thinking about this now than thinking about it all a lot later. So I think that's it. Like, it's 10 to, so I don't want to oh, sorry, there's a question there from Raymundo. Hi, Raymundo. In order to get a one-to-one on the career subjects, do I need to complete a module? I began the course on January 10th. Oh, welcome. So you've just arrived. Oh, great. Come here. I hope you're enjoying it. So don't worry, Raymundo. I tell you what, there's a careers hub, and people are usually enrolled within about 3 weeks of starting. So perhaps you just haven't been enrolled yet. But basically, we would suggest that you do your one-to-one around, not before your second milestone project, but anytime from there in. So yeah, you can book it through the Careers Hub. It's dead simple. So if you just email us at careers@codeinstitute.net, then we can enroll you and it'll all become clearer. But good to have you here, and thanks for coming. Actually, Megan, I wonder what, I'll stick that in here, the careers at Code Institute. Okay. And then, oh, sorry, yes. Megan, I need to remind everybody that you can sign up. The next Careers Masterclass that we're doing is how to understand a modern SaaS business. So basically what that webinar is about is to try and make sure that you're familiar with how kind of a software company is structured and what the different names of the teams are and how they interconnect. And it's a really, really, really beneficial session because it can help you in lots of ways just to kind of see how technical skills are used in multiple teams, and what that you might digest that and have a think about it in reflection of your own skill sets and what kind of career you want from here. But also, really importantly, it takes out all of the nonsense sometimes and complicated language that you might see in a job spec and think, what are they talking about? Who are they talking about? So we're going to look at some of the algorithms that you see a lot in job specs and ads and just kind of simplify it for you so that it's not like intimidating. And I think that it just really helps when you start reading job descriptions then, or you see job titles that you've never heard of before, and we can explain to you sort of what they mean and what you might do in a job like that. So it's in there it's in there now if you wanted to sign up, and Megan will be advertising it on Slack during the week. And then there is also, tomorrow we have a live session with Ajin, which is at lunchtime. So just Ajin are a fintech hiring partner. They've been hiring a lot of graduates in both Amsterdam and in London, but they have lots of other offices. So anyway, they're going to be here with some alumni to talk about their organization. Just a heads up, it won't be recorded. Ajin marketing stipulations are that they can't record any content. So just to let you know, if you are free at all, even for a few minutes, to pop in and check it out. And again, sign up details for that are on Slack. So okay, so then one last question from Joy. Joy, thank you. So at what stage of the course should we schedule a one-to-one with the team? We recommend that you start thinking about doing it after your second milestone project, and it allows us a lot of time then to sort of maybe, share that knowledge with you and have those recruitment documents reviewed so that they're ready if you wanted to start applying for roles. By the way, please don't take that as a trigger for recruitment. Everyone's got different plans here, so we just want to make sure that we've got the sort of traditional part of recruitment, shared with you at early stages, and that you're really comfortable, that you know how to present yourself and talk about yourself to a tech audience, and we've given you some advice. Again, it's there in the hub, so you can book it in. Okay, so guys, you seem to have like cured my cough, so thank you very much. All this talking is a good remedy for it. And look, a big thanks from me. This is time really well spent, and the questions are really helpful for us as well when it comes to sort of putting some content together. And well done to you guys. So what you've left with today is really good insight as how to write a really killer cover letter. And whether you find this easy, medium, or hard, it's really important to get some insights as to what the industry wants to see in it and how it's going to be handled and viewed when you send it out. So well done. Time really well spent, and thank you very much. So look, hopefully we'll see you all at some of the other career events this week and next week, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. So thanks a million. Bye.